Morning and welcome to the Thursday, January 19th edition of the OBX Wave Report, where we discuss all things waves, weather, climate, and beach lifestyle. And for this edition, we're going to primarily focus on waves and weather for the Outer Banks today, although we will talk a little bit about conditions for the US West, which appear to continue to see a lessening of stormy conditions, which is a good thing, certainly. And I guess we'll take a little bit of a look at the North Atlantic generally and see if there's any big wave events expected for Europe. It does seem, however, that the big wave events for Europe and the US West Coast are tamping down a bit, even as wave conditions here in the Outer Banks have tended to moderate as well. I got out to Jeanette's Pier yesterday, and though the wave monitors were predicting waves in the range of about 2 to 3 feet over at Jeanette's Pier, it didn't really look like the waves were anywhere near that high. It looked more like in the range of about 1, maybe 2 feet yesterday. So we'll see if the wave monitors are in a similar position today of overestimating the wave heights there at Jeanette's Pier. In any case, for the US East right now, we are seeing another impulse of stormy weather moving through with some storms in the Appalachian area, particularly focusing up here more toward Virginia and Pennsylvania with a low pressure system sweeping in south of the Great Lakes. And here in the Outer Banks, we expect perhaps to have some showers, particularly for the northern beaches. And then for the southern beaches, we expect cloudy conditions and windy conditions later on in the day as this front sweeps through, bringing in winds from the south. All right, so let's look at the infrared satellite shot, and we can see these storms, these high cold cloud tops swirling around this low pressure system. And then out west, you can see the generally clearer conditions for California with a little bit of an impulse moving in over the mountains in the west. And further offshore, we've got a front moving on eastward, an area of disturbed and squally weather, moving on into the central North Atlantic. Looking at the radar picture, I'm going to go ahead and update this. We have the area of stormy weather focusing mainly on the US Northeast, particularly Pennsylvania and New York, parts of Maryland and West Virginia. Although we do have some trailing lines of storms running in through North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And on the Outer Banks, we have a couple of, well, there's a gale warning. That's interesting. So okay, so we have some gale warnings in the near offshore waters for the southern beaches. This makes sense to me because I also saw wind advisories up for the coast. So for the near coastal waters, we have gale warnings that are expected to be in effect for today. And then for the northern beaches, we've got small craft advisories. I did want to note that the trend for California clearing out is ongoing. As usual with these kind of extreme weather events, you've got the typical discussion in the news about to what degree climate change had an impact on the series of storms smashing into California. We haven't yet had an official assessment on a climate fingerprint for this system, although in a warming world, it's very difficult to separate climate influence entirely from any extreme weather event. For me, what I tend to do when I hear the controversy over whether climate in fact impacted a particular extreme weather event or to what degree climate impacted a particular extreme weather event, I hearken back to the climate scientist James Hansen, who is the former head of GISS NASA, who said that when you add heat to the climate system, you load the dice for more extreme events. And so, for me at least, listening to that and looking at all the ocean heat out there and all the extra water vapor getting pumped into the atmosphere, it even with an extreme event that was not the worst of its kind, worst ever, worst record event, we're still living in an Earth system that is 1.6 degrees Celsius hotter than normal. And I'm sorry, 1.2 degrees Celsius hotter than the 1880s averages. And that system is has that loaded dice influence that Dr. James Hansen is talking about. So even if the event that occurred in California is not the worst ever, it's, I don't know, in certain locations, the rainfall is, from what I've seen in some news reports, and I'm sure the final assessments will be coming out, but in the range of about third worst on record for certain areas. Um, that's still an extraordinary event. That's a once maybe in 50-year kind of event. And what we have seen is that the frequency of the so-called once in 100, once in 50, once in 1,000, once in 500-year kinds of events has increased. So especially for extreme rainfall and extreme precipitation, because as the Earth system warms, you increase the rate of evaporation and the intensity of evaporation and the intensity of precipitation. Um, I'm going to look at some scientist statements just generally for climate today in a kind of a special report. But it is worth noting that one of the scientists, Peter Gleek, has been talking in a very nuanced and accurate fashion in my view on the issue of climate change and climate impacts in California. So I recommend you take a look at Peter Gleek and what he is saying. A lot of the scientists, at least the ones I follow on Twitter, seem to have been. I would, put an asterisk by them because I am my background when it comes to analysis is more on the threat side. So I can tend to look at things from more of a threat perspective, and that can color my own observations. And so I would look more toward the scientists and the scientific process when talking about climate impacts, and listen to what they have to say, and particularly look at what they have to say about how to manage changes in climate. And that's one of the things that Peter Gleek is talking about over there in California with managing a new state, a new climate state for California, in which the rainfall events tend are trending toward in, intense events that dump a lot of water all at once, which present challenges to water management. But at this point, those challenges are not insurmountable if we make the appropriate changes, according to what I've been reading from Peter Glick. And don't take it from me. You follow him on Twitter. Read specifically what he has to say, because I don't want to misrepresent anything that he is saying. But the sense that I am getting is again more of a nuanced view from the science and the scientist, which in my opinion is a good thing. Nuance is good. It's how we learn. It's how we find distinctions, and we can fine tune our responses to events, and we can also modulate how we process these events and where we put them. It's not like every event is a nothing or a crazy extreme. If we look at events in a broader range of understanding from between those two crazy points, we tend to be less manic and more consider it and coming up with more, appropriate actions as a society. And I think that one of the things about just social media generally is that, the, it's just the messaging just tends to get pushed to an extreme, and we're all in some ways, those of us who communicate on social media, it's hard not to get wrapped into that. But it's something that we should maybe think about. But in any case, again, this is the NOAA quantitative prediction forecast for the United States. And right now, as we look at California, it's drying out there in the forecast. And then as we look for the US East Coast, according to the NOAA quantitative prediction forecast, the rains and storms appear to be trending toward more intense here for the US East Coast. So we should keep a weather eye for storms as we go forward. Though right now, today, at least for the Outer Banks, we've got a milder impulse coming in. And even though there's gales up for the southern beaches, it's not too intense, not too extreme. All right. Although definitely, if you're out there in a small craft, be very careful because a gale is nothing to shake a stick at. And we'll look at some wind models and some wave models to talk about what's going on the coastlines and in the near offshore environment. Excuse me, I've got this winter thing, so I'm gonna take care of that. All right. I don't know, it's kind of a winter thing in the morning thing. Okay, in any case, let's get down to our local observations for the Outer Banks. We've talked a little bit about California and the general weather trend for the US coming up. And is our map not going to load? We're going to use Google Maps here for some informational purposes about the Outer Banks for you guys. And here at Jeanette's Pier, which is just a few miles east of my present location in Manteo, North Carolina, waves are presently, according to wave monitors, in the range of 2 to 3 feet, with a primary swell coming in at 11 seconds and a secondary swell coming in at 9 seconds. Winds are out of the south at 10 miles per hour, which is cross to offshore. It's kind of coming in at an angle there with that northeast facing beach. Air temperatures are 62 degrees Fahrenheit, ocean water temperatures of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Weather conditions today expected are, well, we're expected to see the cloud deck increasing and thickening over the course of the day with a chance of rain by afternoon, about 30% chance of rain. And the expected high today is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It seems that we're in this trend of warmer than predicted temperatures. When things get nice here, it seems to warm up a little bit more than the weather forecast expects. So yesterday it was supposed to be, I think, 59, and I think it likely got into the lower to middle 60s yesterday. So maybe a similar kind of event going to occur today. In any case, moving on down the coast, we're going to look at Road Anthony, or Rodanth, as the case may be. There's like 3 ways to say things down here for everything. Okay, so Rodanth right now is experiencing 2 to 3 foot surf as well. So according to Wave Monitor's rideable surf, and I mean, nothing really amazing, but nonetheless, some decent waves down there at Rodanth in the 2 to 3 foot range, with waves coming in with a primary swell of 11 seconds and a secondary swell of 9 seconds. Winds are also out of the south at 8 miles per hour. These are lighter winds than are expected later this afternoon. That 8-mile per hour southerly wind is a cross-shore wind, but with the wind so light, it's likely to be pretty glassy out there right now. Air temperatures are in the range of about 63 degrees Fahrenheit, with ocean water temperatures around 56. The weather forecasts today are for clouds thickening for Rodanth and windy conditions expected later in the day, with highs in the middle 60s. These winds coming out of the south. So that's going to push the swell up from the south, and so we'll tend to have like a south and southwest flow for the wind pattern over the central and southern Outer Banks, getting a little bit more of a westerly component as we move further south. And then moving on down to Buxton, which tends to be the big wave spot of the Outer Banks. And not every single day, but we do seem to get bigger waves at Buxton. So moving on down to Buxton, present wave conditions are also in the range of 2 to 3 feet, according to the wave monitors. Primary swell is coming in at 11 seconds with a 6-second secondary swell. Winds are out of the southwest at 12 miles per hour. That's offshore with a little bit of a cross-shore component. Air temperatures are in the range of 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and ocean water temperature is about 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Weather conditions for today, again, clouds thickening and stronger winds by afternoon with a high in the middle 60s. Okay, so let's look at the global forecast system model. I've zoomed it out for all of North America so we can see the progression of storms here. And I do want to talk about storms and where they're going and where the clearer weather is expected. And there are some features that I want to point out. One is a high pressure system out here off the US West Coast with a battery of highs. I don't know if that's an appropriate descriptor, but we've got 3 high pressure systems clustered here over the US West, and this is tending to push the storms off to the north toward Alaska and Canada. We're going to go ahead and advance the models, and I just want to show you what's going on with these storms. So we got one heading up into Alaska and the Canadian West Coast at 967 millibars. We got a 960 millibar storm roaring here south of the Aleutians, this by Saturday. But it's just worth noting that California here is not getting the full brunt of it. It's sitting in a much less stormy condition here with the Sentinel high pressure system reforming off the US West Coast as another system. 960 millibar system sets its sights on Alaska and the west coast of Canada. Actually, it looks like it's just hurling out a frontal boundary as it sits south of the Aleutians here in the forecast running into Monday. And not much in the way of weather for California, just a lot of weather aiming here at the southern coast of Alaska and the west coast of Canada. And this trend appears to continue on throughout much of the middle portion of the model, with the storms continuing to aim more at Canada and Alaska, getting a little bit of an impulse late in the model coming into California, but doesn't look too strong, with maybe a 1,000 millibar low north and even weaker low south. And then the high keeps reforming off California, although by the end of the model, we start to get little impulses coming back into California. Nonetheless, the main force of the storms keeps driving off north toward Alaska and the west coast of Canada, so that region might be worth looking at for extreme weather as opposed to California. Now let's go ahead and look east, because the models are seeming to indicate that the east is expected to get more stormy. And so let's go ahead and look at storms for the US East. So we've got this storm that runs through today. And then by Sunday, we have another coastal storm that forms near the Gulf Coast and then marches on up through the southeast, possibly bringing in some relatively severe weather. Although 999 millibar system isn't too intense, it can fire off some pretty severe storms. And then this one's kind of hanging out near the coastline, but it's moving on pretty quick in the models up to the northeast and then heading on up to Newfoundland and out to sea, as another system taps into that hotter than normal Gulf of Mexico air and drags a frontal boundary in through the southeast of the US. And this running in through Wednesday. Of course, this is getting further on into the model, so we can start taking things with more of a grain of salt, but the tendency for storminess for the US East is there. And with this system by Wednesday, we've got pretty strong, looks like coastal storms getting dragged in with a front here and then another low over the Great Lakes region that then shifts on to the northeast by Thursday. This getting pretty far out in the models, but I do want to show the tendency. And then there's a little bit of a respite, but then we get another impulse that is expected to form 2 weeks from now. And this is well far out in the models. But yeah, we get an impulse in the model forming in the Gulf and then heading toward the southeast. And this is definitely a coastal low. Looks like a nor'easter, although a quick one, doesn't get bottled up. So maybe lasting for the course of about a day. And these systems are moving through pretty quick, which is a good thing. But it is worth noting that later in the models, this storm does bomb out quite a bit as it gets. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's look at this thing. So you got a lot of Gulf moisture coming in here, warmer than normal ocean waters off the U.S. East Coast, and the storm hits them, and then in the models really starts to bomb out. So we got a 1,000 millibar low, and then six in the, let's see, this is 1200 Zulu hour on Monday, and then in the 1800, 6 hours later, we've got a nine. Looks like, is that a 980 something? Sometimes these are hard to read. Might be 990s. Looks like actually. Eh, I am getting old. Here we go. Okay, there we go. 995 millibar. I need to have my glasses adjusted. Okay, so we get a 995 millibar low. So dropping about 10 millibars in 6 hours, pretty rapid intensification. Now look at this next 6 hour. 980, so boom, 15 millibar drop, so 25 millibar drop in 12 hours as the storm races north. And then as we get over the US Northeast, wow, what a bomb. It gets down into 967. And that, my friends, is a very intense storm over land. Although this is, I said US Northeast, this is more west of Newfoundland. So this is more Eastern Canada event now. And then as we get further into Eastern Canada, 958 millibar, that is brutally intense. Okay, well, this is potentially 2 weeks out, so huge grain of salt time. Nonetheless, something interesting in the model showing relatively in, oh God, 934 millibar as we hit on into Greenland and Baffin Bay. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. That could be a rather interesting and powerful and extreme storm event. I said interesting from the weather perspective, potentially dangerous from the just general public perspective. Um, but wow, I'm curious. 930, is that 930? No, that's 942. 942, 951. Okay, so a very long term. I've probably lingered on this for way too long, but and massive grain of salt time because this is way out in the models. But we'll keep a weather eye to it. The main thing to talk about here is that there is just a tendency for strong storms to develop through the eastern portion of North America. And of course, we in the Outer Banks here are in the eastern portion. And even as we get into the end of the model, we've got another stormy impulse predicted to come in with another one following on. And then for the US West, it does seem toward the end of the model that things do get a little bit stormier, but nowhere near the kinds of conditions that we were looking at in late December, early to mid-January, at least in these forecasts. So good news for the West, weather eye to storms for the East, but nothing too crazy predicted except for perhaps in the extreme long term of our model summary. Okay, so let's get back to now. we spent a lot of time looking at the weather. Let's get back to the waves. So right now, wave conditions off the Outer Banks are in the range of about 2 to 3 feet in the near coastal waters, and that's what we're seeing also at the coastal level for observations. Throughout the day-to-day, winds are going to pick up from the south, And I'm going to go ahead and advance the models forward and show you we are expected to get 7 to 8 foot swell south in the near coastal waters, 6 foot swell in the near coastal waters offshore with those stronger winds coming in from the south. We do have gale warnings up for the offshore region, and it does look like in these models these winds do get up to near gale force range, but nothing too crazy, not a really strong gale here, more looking like a minimal gale. We'll see if those waves translate down to the coast. Most of the wave monitors are in the near coastal regions not picking this thing up. So we'll see if the system, it does appear that this system's likely to pump up the waves more than the wave monitors are indicating in the near coastal regions. I guess I will say that. Okay, so moving on to tomorrow, these waves then seem to immediately tamp back down pretty quick to the 2 to 3 foot range in the near offshore waters. And then by Saturday, the 21st, we've got much calmer conditions in the range of 2 to 3 feet in the near offshore environment. And then by Monday, we've got another stormy impulse coming in. Sunday, I'm sorry. By Sunday, we got another stormy impulse coming in, kicking up the near offshore waves to the 8 to 9 foot range. So pretty big waves there. And it looks like these are expected to build even a little bit more, particularly as you get offshore and the storm intensifies as it hits the Gulf Stream there. And let's go ahead and run the models out to the end as we get on into Tuesday. Oh, no, we can't go to Tuesday. All right, so a couple of stormy impulses predicted to sweep in, one today and one on Sunday and Monday. I'm sorry, one on Monday and Tuesday. So one for today, one for Monday and Tuesday. I expected to kick up the swell from the south and bring some larger waves with that southerly swell and those southerly winds and some gale conditions. Let's go ahead and just look at the air so we can, I'm just going to back this up. There we go. Let's back it up. Okay. So again, on Monday, another gale in the offshore, kicking up those wave heights and bringing another swell in from the south for the Outer Banks. I do want to just look at the US West Coast just to talk about some wave conditions out there. And we'll just go ahead and look at those. Right now, waves are generally pretty decent for the US West Coast, off of Los Angeles in the range of 6 to 7 feet. And then as you get closer to the beaches, much smaller for the south facing beaches. And then, yeah, for the southern regions, smaller waves. But then for the northern to central coastal, northern to central coastal regions, waves in the range of 7 to 8 feet. Heading out across the Atlantic right now, we do have the tail end of a system that swept in some bigger surf for Portugal and Spain, and north and west of Nazar, wave heights are in the range of 11.5 feet. Nazar being a big wave spot, very big, very dangerous, very freaky, very interesting and fun to watch. You have to be a really radical or just crazy surfer to do that kind of stuff. And then off of the northeast coast of Spain, significant wave heights in the range of about 19 feet. So pretty big waves there. I'm going to go ahead and advance the model because we've had some strong storms up in the North Atlantic, but lately it doesn't look like things are anywhere near as intense. Nonetheless, we're still a relatively stormy North Atlantic, but nothing as intense as what we've recently experienced for Ireland or Portugal. And let's see. Oh, yeah, and I was looking at the Arctic. I'm going to talk about the Arctic later. The Arctic has been very warm for December, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to do a little roundup of scientists talking and on social media. So scientists talking on social media. So I do want to highlight what some of the scientists are saying in a special edition of the OBX Wave Report. And Um, but we're not going to get into that now. So for the wrap up for today for our OBX wave report for January 19th, Thursday, waves right now in the Outer Banks are 1 to 3 feet. We have a stormy impulse, a front being dragged by a low pressure system coming in from the west, which is expected to bring rainfall and gales offshore and some larger surf later today. And cloudy conditions sweeping in. Warm conditions, though, are expected to continue through at least the weekend with warmer than normal conditions over most of the Outer Banks. So we're definitely going to experience a lot of pleasant warmth here over the next few days, even if things are a little bit stormy intermittently. So thank you for joining me for the OBX Wave Report, and please remember to do everything you can to help accelerate the clean energy transition to wind, water, solar, electric vehicles, and the new clean energy technologies that do become viable as they emerge, but primarily just focusing on mass deployment at this time. And this response to climate change in the form of clean energy is the best way that we can defend our coastlines at present. And climate change and sea level rise being driven primarily by fossil fuel burning. So thank you for joining me again. We're going to talk a little bit about what the scientists are saying in our next OBX wave report, and then we're going to head on back to the beaches. But I do invite you to take a look at some of the videos that we posted yesterday. We got a cool video of a pod of porpoises, or I'm sorry, dolphins. They look like Atlantic bottlenose dolphins swimming off the coastline in the Outer Banks, and that was a fun shot. And of course, we got a very pleasant video of just a nice condition at the beach down there as well. So in any case, thank you for joining me, and I will be back with you shortly.